Hi, I'm Jenny Barker of newmenaturally.com. I'm a naturopath and a health educator, and I help people discover if they have food intolerances, as I believe that removing food intolerances from your diet is one of the most powerful ways that you can improve your health. So today we are going to dive into the topic of how to cook for your family when one or more of you have food intolerances. Now, I know that a number of you with food intolerances find it difficult to cook for your family when one of you has food intolerances, or maybe more of you. So I am gluten and dairy intolerant. My two teenage boys are gluten intolerant as well, and my husband eats anything. So I always try and cook one meal but that caters to everyone. I really try and avoid doing two separate meals, as that's a lot of hassle and effort. Sometimes I do that, but normally I would just try and cook for one meal for the family that's going to suit everyone. So today I'm going to give you 5 tips on different ways that I swap out gluten and dairy when I am cooking for our family. So tip number 1, so when I'm making something like some meatballs or cottage pie, then I'll take out from the recipe, take out the gluten breadcrumbs, and I will just use gluten-free breadcrumbs. So I normally use brown rice crumbs, as I like using those because they're a whole grain, or you can make your own breadcrumbs from gluten-free bread. So you could just get some of your gluten-free bread and pop it through the kitchen whiz and blend up your own breadcrumbs. Now, in terms of making a cottage pie, so you would also have butter normally and dairy milk in the mashed potato. So you could take out the butter and you could put in olive oil. You can use ghee, but that does contain dairy, but a lot of people that are dairy intolerant are okay with ghee, even though they're not okay with butter, because it has less of the proteins in it. So you could use ghee if you're okay with that. In terms of the milk, I would just use whatever milk I've got open, so it could be rice milk, almond milk, coconut milk, or the main ones that I use, so you could just swap those out. Now when you're putting the topping on and you were going to put cheese on there, so I would just have my portion separate and not put any cheese on that, or you could put it in a separate baking dish if you wanted to. So I'd put cheese on the rest of my family's portions but not on mine, so then mine is gluten and dairy free, whereas theirs is just going to be gluten free. Now when I'm cooking something that has pasta in it, then I will just swap out the normal gluten pasta, which will normally be made from wheat, and I will just use, there's so many gluten-free pastas now, so sometimes I'll use the lentil pastas, or I will use the rice ones, so brown rice ones, or you can get quinoa, or you can get buckwheat. So there's all sorts of different types of pastas, so pasta is a super easy one to swap out, and most people can't tell the difference either. And it's good for people to be having a whole range of grains, even if they are gluten eaters. So the third tip is croutons. So when you're making a salad, I always think it adds a nice dimension to be adding croutons in there. And if you're like me and you eat out, you have salads and you want it gluten free, then often they'll take the croutons out, and so you kind of feel like you're missing out on a part of the yumminess. So when I'm at home, I always make croutons if I'm doing a salad. And so what I would do is just put a couple of pieces of gluten-free bread in the toaster, just lightly toast it, cut it up into little squares, and then get a fry pan, pop a bit of olive oil in there, and put the little squares of your bread into the fry pan, flick it around so they get covered in the olive oil, and then I'd sprinkle some garlic powder, some salt, and then some herbs. So I might put in some oregano or some rosemary, and so that just adds a really nice flavour. Sometimes I might add a little bit of paprika and just flick them around the pan for a couple of minutes until they're slightly toasted, and then you can take them out, and they are super yummy. So tip number 4, so if I was making a curry or a pasta sauce, then instead of using cream, so dairy cream, then I would use coconut milk or coconut cream, but I always use the ones out of the tin. So I wouldn't be using the ones out of the carton, because the coconut milk out of there is just so watered down. So I would always use the ones out of the tin, and they have that lovely creamy texture as well. So they are super easy to swap out for dairy milk or dairy cream. And if you're doing a pasta sauce or a curry. And the 5th tip that I have is when I'm doing baking. So I am well known for, when I do baking, to swap out all sorts of things and try all sorts of things, and most of the time it works out. Occasionally it doesn't. And so I often will just use normal gluten recipes, and we'll just swap out the flour and the dairy that's in there. And so you can use the gluten-free flour mixes that you'll get from your supermarket, or you can make up your own, but you do tend to, for it to work with baking, you do tend to need a combination of different flours, and then often they'll add in something like some xanthan gum to bind and hold things together. So you can just use gluten-free flour. In terms of if you're making some muffins and it said to put some milk in there, then I again would use whichever milk that I have available. So if I've got coconut milk, I would use that, or I would use rice milk or almond milk, and typically it turns out, and you normally can't taste it anyway. So those are easy switches there. And with the gluten-free flour, you know, they are still highly refined flour. If you're getting the ones from the supermarket, they're very white, and so they're not whole grains. So I would use those, you know, on occasions. I wouldn't be eating those sorts of foods every day that have those, the gluten-free flour mixes in it. Now, for those of you who are not sure if you're dairy intolerant, but you suspect you might be, or you want to find out if you are or not, then I've got a really helpful cheat sheet on our website. And so in the cheat sheet, it goes through and it tells you what are the most common foods that contain dairy. It gives you substitutes for each of the foods. It talks you through what are the foods that have got lots of calcium in them, so to make sure that you're getting your calcium requirements. And there's a couple of my favorite recipes on there as well, the dairy-free recipes. So if you go onto our website, you'll find that. So just go to www.newmenaturally.com/dairy-free and you will see the cheat sheet. You know, dairy intolerance is really common and it can cause all sorts of symptoms. So you really don't want to be having dairy or very minimal dairy because it can cause a lot of inflammation and a lot of problems. So you do want to check out whether you are dairy intolerant or not. Now, in terms of cooking for people that have food intolerances, it does become easier as you get to know which foods that they can't have and which foods you can use as substitutes. Then it does become much easier. So please don't stress about it. It will get easier. I hope this has been helpful. Bye for now.